Okay, there we go.
Okay, so great. So now we're recording, and I'll say if you're one of the folks who is watching on recording, my contact information is going to be at the last slide, and also both Alyssa and Brittany have access to it, and you're welcome to email me questions, and I'm happy to continue this conversation. So let's see if I can, oh, there we go. There we go. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what brain development looks like through adolescence, what is executive functioning, and what's going on with anxiety, because those are two big things that become really prevalent during adolescence. Talking about kind of how to work with those things, how to make sure that executive functioning is developing as well as it should, and teaching emotional regulations and some strategies for families or classroom families, right? Because a lot of you guys are teachers. So in terms of brain development, we used to think that, Brittany, can you see the whole slide, or is it partially blocked? Okay, I just want to make sure. All right. We used to think that brain development was kind of done at the age of 5, because 90% of brain development happens from 0 to 5. And we thought that it was really not much happening beyond that, but they started doing a lot of studies, and especially with the advent of MRI and fMRI, and discovered that so much changes. It's a small amount of brain development that happens in adolescence, but what happens is so incredibly important. So at this time that we're talking about, the adolescent, we're at an age where they can reason abstractly and think in hypotheticals. So you can start to talk to them about really abstract concepts like freedom and democracy. These are very, very abstract. They can start to handle and understand what those mean. Whereas the younger children earlier in elementary school, it's really got to be pretty concrete. It's got to be 10 plus 12, and they're not able to talk about those more abstract concepts. So I think adolescence is really interesting and fun. It's very complicated, and there's a lot of changes, and there's kind of 3 stages. So the reason we're starting to talk about this at the age of 10 to 13 is because some kids really won't enter adolescence until they are older. It really is, when does puberty start? When the hormones start is when the brain development starts. Girls, the average age to begin puberty, not get a period necessarily, but just to begin with the hormonal changes, is 10 and a half. And then the period usually follows 2 to 2.5 years after that. And then for boys, the average age of onset of puberty is 12 and a half. So parents still usually have a lot of influence. School is changing, so the demands are going up. So around, kids are about 11 when they start middle school. So it's a big change for them in this age range. So in the middle years is when you often have some conflict, and really the focus shifts a bit from parents and the family unit being the most influential, to teens start to focus more on their friends and develop on relationships with friends, a social group, and sometimes a romantic bond. Oh, sorry. And then 17 to 21, there's just so many major life decisions being made, and having good self-esteem during that time is really important so you can make good decisions. What's important to remember, though, that teenagers are not adults. Sometimes we feel like they're adults, but they aren't. They're really missing some very critical skills, which we'll talk about. And in general, we really overestimate the ability of kids this age to be able to handle themselves in the world and make good decisions. They still struggle with emotional and behavioral regulation because of that brain development, and they're still pretty impulsive. And they are this way for a reason, because they are supposed to be, during this time period, leaving home and forming their own social group. So it's kind of good that they're not so sensitive to fear, because those are pretty scary things to do. So what we see, this is what happens. The purple is where the brain is more mature and dense. So at the age of 5, you see that the brain is lovely, but there's not a lot happening in this frontal lobe. And then you see here, this is the beginning of adolescence, and there's some nice dense material around here, but the frontal part of the brain is still really very underdeveloped. And it's actually not fully developed until the age of 25 to 27. So brain development continues for that long. And this was a neat study. Since about 10% of our kids have ADHD, I always like to put this up because it also shows normal brain development. So the purple is neurotypical controls. And you can see that still at 13, they're really still pretty underdeveloped in those frontal lobes. And the kids with ADHD, though, are on average 3 years behind in their frontal lobe development. So if you have a kid who's maybe very, very bright, but has ADHD, you can expect them to be able to abstract and reason and problem solve, but maybe not turn their homework in. And that's what we see a lot. So the prefrontal cortex right here, that's planning, reasoning, problem solving. That's really immature in teens, which is why they're more prone to high risk behavior. And the amygdala is a fear area deep into your brain. So, if there's a panic attack, that's coming from the amygdala. It's the fight or flight center. Adults don't rely on the fight or flight center as much. They tend to use their prefrontal cortex to kind of talk to that part of their brain that's panicking and tell them to calm down. Teenagers don't have as much frontal lobe development. So the amygdala, the fight or flight center, is more in control. So, and then in the parietal lobe, they're just not processing information as efficiently do. They're also more excited by rewards than they are by consequences. And the memory, we tend to start losing some of our memory and learning, but the teenage brain is primed for memory and learning, which is a good thing and a bad thing, because if you start having negative things happening during your teenage years, it's almost like your brain becomes wired for it. So things like substance abuse, that's something you really want to watch out for with teenagers, because it impacts their brain additionally. So if you start using addictive substances before the age of 18, they're 6.5 times more likely to develop a disorder compared to those who start using substances after 21. And I'm talking about caffeine and alcohol here, as well as things that are more problematic. The good news is that since they do have a lot of resilience in that brain. So what this means is that you can easily develop these negative cycles where you have, problems that are developing, anxiety, substance use, sleep problems, but you can just as easily get on a positive and a positive spiral where they learn kind of healthy risk taking, like auditioning for that play or trying out for that sports team. And then if they get support from adults for those healthy learning opportunities, they get a little bit more responsibility, they improve their self-confidence, and they support risk-taking in that positive way. So the adolescent brain is almost like the toddler brain in terms of it's a second window of opportunity to really reshape. So the developmental goals, we talked about eventually becoming independent from your family of origin, moving out, forming a new social group and family. And this feels like life or death to them, because in many ways it is. So what is very common is that there are shifts in social groups, and it is truly, truly painful for these teenagers when they shift social groups, because it was like this was I have my family, and then I'm trying to develop a second family, and then losing that second family is like, okay, that didn't work. I have to find a new one. It's very, very painful, much more than it would be to lose a friend as an adult. The other piece, and this is why some of those social groups happening or shifting, is that there's identity development. They're trying on different hats. Like maybe they figure out, I don't like soccer anymore, I'm going to start playing basketball. Well, because things are so intense, they probably are shifting entire friend groups, making that shift as well. So that's a difficult but important part of their development. Does anyone have any questions so far? You can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand about kind of the development of the adolescent period. All right, so I want to talk about executive functionings now. Executive functions are those that happen in that underdeveloped frontal lobe, or where the connections are forming. And remember, construction sites are messy. And that's what's happening in brain development. It's a little messy as it's growing. So that's why you're going to see more executive functioning difficulties during adolescence than you might have seen in your 9 or 10-year-old. So the brain functions that are being used to manage attentions, emotions, goal setting behavior, that's what executive functions are. And executive functions are really, really important because they're actually more predictive of success in life and success in school than IQ is. So some of the executive functionings are planning, organizing, having control of your own behavior, getting started on a task, managing your time. Metacognition is thinking about thinking. Do you understand how you think? Do you understand how you learn? And then develop strategies based on that. Working memory, which is kind of like the notepad in your brain. So the working memory is, when you have to log into something and you get a text and you get a 6-digit code, having to remember that code temporarily and type it in, that's your working memory. And that's really important for math and science. Attention, being able to sustain and focus it, being flexible in your thinking, and also perseverance or grit, not giving up. So the evidence shows that the emotional stability and self-regulation count as twice as much as IQ in terms of your final grades in college. It's really not about how smart you are at some point. It's about how hard you work, how well you regulate your emotions, and how consistent you are in your process. So, of course, we're not just talking about ADHD here, but in general, because you have this underdeveloped frontal lobe, there's a big gap, certainly with kids with ADHD throughout the lifespan, but certainly in all adolescents, a gap between knowing what you're supposed to do and actually doing it. And that's part of that frontal lobe development, because in the frontal lobes is where you actually do, and back here is where you know. So there, just to understand there can be a gap there. This is a really interesting study. This poor kid is about 4 years old, and this was called the Marshmallow Study. And they did it in the 1950s. And what they found out, and they've repeated it since then a few times. So what they do is they take these little kids and they put them in a room and they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I just got called away. I'll be right back. I'm leaving you here with this marshmallow. If you can wait to eat it until I get back, then I will bring you a second marshmallow." And then they go watch them behind one-way glass and see how long they can go without eating that marshmallow. And this kid had the best facial expressions about it because he really wanted the second marshmallow, but he really wanted to eat that marshmallow now. And that's what's called delaying gratification. So that is, the whole idea of, I am not going to watch this TV show until my homework gets done. This is, even though the new episode of Ted Lasso just came out and I really want to see it, this is the delaying the gratification. And it's really, really important to long-term success in all areas of your life. So I'm going to switch and talk a little bit about anxiety and depression, which are incredibly common right now. And I don't feel like I can talk about adolescence without talking about it. So anxiety disorders are the most common things that people experience across the lifespan. Pre-pandemic, we thought we had a crisis because we were up to 12.5%. And it was pre-pandemic, we were getting increases every single year. We were at about 5 to 8 times the rates of anxiety that were achieved in the 1950s. And when you have anxiety in the first grade, it's been shown to actually affect your academics in the 5th grade. So it really has to do with those emotional regulation things, deciding that you can't learn something, having growth mindset. And it's very, very prevalent. But one thing that's really important to help with not developing anxiety is play. And when we're talking about play, we're talking about unstructured, outdoor, physical play, ideally. Although unstructured indoor, less physical play is fine too, and very helpful. But, the whole idea of a bunch of kids going out into the street and figuring out what the rules are and what the boundaries are, that's actually how you build your executive functioning skills, is by having to do that for yourself. And adults, we so often provide so much structure for kids that they don't know what to do when they're unstructured. And then we send them off to college and they really don't know what to do when their time isn't being structured. They don't know how to structure it themselves. So there's this psychologist named Peter Gray who really believes that free play is important for developing psychological health, and that the decline in play has really contributed to the rise in a lot of anxiety. And then, so here are some other risk factors for anxiety and depression. I would say certainly traumatic or stressful events. We're hearing a lot about social media use. It's really true. And it's a really hard thing for parents and teens to navigate because they want their kids to have that social connection, but also aware that there's a real downside to it in terms of mental health. Being female places you more at risk. Going through puberty earlier places you more at risk, especially if you're female. Having sleep problems, having academic problems, sometimes not having academic problems, but still feeling very stressed about your academics, even if you're doing well. Having that shy, sensitive temperament. And then the thing that I really look at, and particularly if I'm thinking about suicide risk, is social peer rejection. That seems to be what triggers it in so many cases, being rejected by your peers. And then of course, poverty, difficulties happening within the family, and especially health issues tend to definitely may be greater risk factors. So where we are now for teenagers is that 30 to 40% of teens have a diagnosable anxiety or depressive disorder, which is much higher than that 12.5% that we were at pre-pandemic. I think we really hoped that getting back to normal routines would fix it for the teenagers after the pandemic, but it does not seem like that has worked, unfortunately. We probably hit them at a pretty vulnerable point in their development and have created a negative spiral instead of a positive one. And 50% of teen girls are reporting feeling persistently sad or hopeless, which is just outstandingly high. And 29% of boys, which is really also outstandingly high, just kind of, seems small compared to the girls. So we have a real problem right now. And one of the things I want us to think about when we're talking about anxiety and depression is that that's your fight or flight center right there, and see how it goes right up against your executive functioning center and your memory and learning center. And I show this slide to kind of show that there's kind of two kinds of brains, because when the amygdala is active, it will suppress the memory and learning center in the hippocampus and the executive functioning center in the prefrontal cortex. You have kind of two brains. You have you're switching channels on the TV. You have a survival brain, which is where the amygdala is active, where the kids are just trying to survive. And you have a learning brain, which is where it's relaxed and can take in information and perform. But many times, if you're sitting there with your students, your kids going, why aren't they able to do this simple thing? You have to think to yourself, right now, is their amygdala activated? Are they in survival mode? Is that what's happening? And I just want to say it's up on us to model this, right? Because there's so many parents who are having major anxiety and depression, and we're certainly influencing our kids, teachers as well. And then we definitely saw that mental health got worse for kids during the pandemic. And it's very consistent across studies. And like I said, we had hoped it would get better, but it really kind of has not. Real quick, I want to talk about suicide just because it is important in kids of this age range, and we're all hearing the headlines about it. It's important to know that it has gone up significantly to be the second leading cause of death in teens after car accidents. And we're at a point now, a 2022 study shows that 20% of high schoolers have considered it, and 9% will make an attempt over the course of their teenage years, which is unbelievable. It's nearly 1 out of 10 kids, which is why I have to talk about it, even though it's not a fun topic to talk about. What's kind of scary about it in teenagers is that it's not necessarily related to their current state of depression. It's more an impulsive move on their part. And the biggest risk factors seem to be where they stand socially and developmentally. And so it's important to just be aware of your kids' mental health, on a daily basis. It's important to be aware of what they might have access to. And it's just important to have this in mind because it happens very, very suddenly. And if you're concerned that your child or a child in your classroom is really having a lot of anxiety and depression, reach out for support. And we're going to talk about how to do that because it really does work to decrease suicide. The other thing we want to do is we really want to work on sleep. So adolescents this is a big risk factor for mental health. They continue to need 8 to 10 hours per night, but on average are getting 6. So America's adolescents are chronically sleep deprived. Remember how I talked about that construction zone that is happening? In the construction zone, there's a lot of waste products that are left behind, and the brain can't clean out the waste products with the lymphatic system like the rest of the body does. Waste products are only cleaned out of the brain during sleep. So they really need to get the maximum amount of sleep possible to clean up those waste products so they can build a healthy frontal lobe. And we know that sleep deprivation is linked to a lot of problems, not the least of which is car accidents from being so sleep deprived in the morning. And it's important to think about, school start times are a major factor, but it's also can be due to poor sleep hygiene. Social media use or anxiety and depression can really impact your sleep. So when I say poor sleep hygiene, what we recommend as psychologists to maximize sleep is to try to go to bed at about the same time every night and wake up at the same time every day. Make sure your room is cool and dark. Not to have caffeine too close to bedtime. All of those things are pretty easy to manage, in my opinion, although it can be hard with the school start times with teenagers. The thing that is so hard is keeping the technology out of their room. So in my opinion, particularly as your kids are of an age where they're starting to get on laptops, they're starting to get on iPads, they're starting to get on phones, we have a really strict rule in my house that those things do not go into your bedroom. And if they do, like if you do have, a Zoom meeting for something and you do need to have that privacy, the products are on your desk and then they go right back to the main room and they're charged in the main room. And that is really, really important because if you start to associate whatever is happening on your phone or your laptop with your bed, then it will impact your sleep and cause insomnia. It's also the blue light from the screens. That's another piece of it. So we have very strict rules around sleep in our house because to me, it's just it's like fundamental. And the reason that they have a hard time falling asleep, though, is that the hormones do create something called an adolescent delayed circadian rhythm phase. So ideally, an adolescent would fall asleep at 11 p.m. and not wake up until 8 or 9 a.m. And obviously that's not always possible, but if you think back to your own life, you probably remember that period of your adolescence. And then you remember that it got better when you got older. It has to do with the hormones. Another thing to keep in mind that really high achieving students or students that are attending really high achieving schools are now considered to be an at-risk group. And this was pre-pandemic too, where the kids do well on standardized tests. There's a lot of pressure. They're just given a lot of pressure to be exceptional. And they seem to have all the advantages, these kids, but they make them very, very vulnerable, actually. So being a student at a high achieving school where kids get really good standardized test scores is equivalent to having in terms of risk factors is now up to being equivalent to having parents who are incarcerated, living in poverty, or having a serious medical condition. So we have to be aware of the pressure that we're putting on kids and making sure to minimize it as much as possible. A college counselor friend of mine liked to say, please let the teachers, let the college counselors, let the guidance counselors handle that piece of it. And ideally, if you can avoid saying the word college to your kid, that would be the best thing to do from pretty much high school on. Another thing to think of is that, and I know so many of us who are parents feel this, it feels like if you're going to participate in sports or music or theater, it feels like it's become very, very intense. Like, you know, and it's not just like, oh, we're going to practice once during the week and have one game on the weekends. No, we're practicing 4 times a week, and we're traveling to games on the weekends, and everything has become a bit more intense. So the kids are feeling, I mean, but they can get a lot out of these things. These can be really good for their mental health, but it's just changed very much, and there's more pressure. So there you can see the stress in them, and we just have to work on pushing back against that. So whereas I'm downing extracurricular activities, and on the one hand, there's real great things about being involved in extracurricular activities. These are some of the protective factors for anxiety and depression, which are often kind of the opposite of what we talked about before, but particularly having engagement in and connections in religion, in athletics, in a job, in a culture, with peers, in a school. These things are very, very protective. I like to say that I really like to see teenagers have at least 3 social groups that they feel like they're definitely a part of, so that if one of those groups falls apart, they feel like they can rely on the other one. So that might be like, you've got your family, you've got your school friends, and you've got your basketball friends. So having those kind of different sets of friends means that if you know, the basketball season ends and you don't see those kids anymore, you still have other groups that you can rely on. In general, for just some strategies, is I just want everyone to remember, teachers and parents alike, that there is real mental health benefit to unstructured rest and playtime. It feels like sometimes like we're wasting time, but it is really very valuable. I'm not talking about playing video games for hours. I'm talking about being creative, inventing something, and doing it in a playful way, and also having opportunities for rest. There's also real value in having fun. One of the first things that we do with kids who are very depressed is we say, when are they having fun? What are they looking forward to? And oftentimes it's nothing. So you need to find some ways for your own mental health, for your kids that you're either parenting or teaching, to make sure that they do have some fun, because there's value in that. There's value in sleep, and there's value in exercise. Screens and social media are not the most horrible things in the world. There is a real value in them, and they can be of big benefit. But you do need to limit it, and you need to monitor it. Our kids know that at this age, they're almost 11 and 13. And it will change as they get older, but right now their phones are not their phones. We are allowed to look at them. We're allowed to check them. We're allowed to read their text messages, and we do so regularly. They know they're being monitored. Another big anchor point for kids is those family dinners. If you can make it work at least a few days a week, if every day, great, but if not, at least a few days a week, everyone comes together, they get some good nutrition, they get to share about their day. There's real value in that. The kids learn how to talk about their emotions, they problem solve during that time, they connect. Those are all really good things. The other thing is chores. Oftentimes, I think we kind of say, oh, you guys are too busy. You have too much on your plate. You have too much academically and going on. We're going to take these chores off your plate. But it's actually really important for their mental health and their independence that they do these chores. It gives them a sense of pride and accomplishment. And kids can do a lot more than they used to. So this was from the 1950s, and this is what they suggested that kids be doing at different ages. I mean, imagine having a 12-year-old completely paint your walls or go grocery shopping. Probably not where we are anymore, but it also lets you know, maybe we are babying our kids a little bit. Maybe they can do a little bit more if given the opportunity. And it's not that you're going to have them do these things completely unsupervised, but maybe they can try. And that'll help them build a sense of pride that they're competent. And it'll help them when it's time for them to finally leave, if they feel like they can handle these things. One thing that I say a lot to families is that, because I know everybody is so busy, but it can be really great to just, all you really need is 15 minutes of connection with your kids a day. That's enough to fill their bucket and make them feel good. But 15 minutes doesn't sound like a lot. 15 minutes is not watching a TV show together or, engaging in something that you're both not enjoying. 15 minutes is you just kind of listening to your kid or engaging in a fun or playful activity with your kid just to connect with them. Even if it's just doing a board game or taking the dog for a walk. Kids will open up a lot more in the car, or they'll open up a lot more when they're not looking at you. So the car is great. Taking the dog for a walk is great. Doing a board game is great. You're not having to make this direct eye contact. They don't feel as much pressure. But the point is, like, how do you respond to them in those moments? Like, if they tell you about something that happened, do you say, oh my gosh, that's terrible, I need to send the teacher an email? Or do you say, how did you feel about that? What do you think you could do to solve that problem? That sounds like that was really hard to go through today. Just those reflective statements that let them know that you are calm and that you kind of trust them to handle things, and that you're just going to listen and reflect and have some time where you're not teaching, you're not problem solving, you're just kind of talking and being there for them. Another thing I think is so important is talking about emotions. So the average number of emotions that Americans can name is 4, where there's actually hundreds of emotions. And if you can't name it, you can't deal with it. We say in psychology a lot, name it to tame it. And so it's really important, and as young as you can get them to do it, to be able to have them label how they're feeling. I'm feeling really mad. I'm frustrated. I'm feeling, really lonely. I'm feeling kind of empty inside, whatever it is that they're saying. And this feelings wheel is great. I had a patient who loved the feelings wheel so much that he had a pillow made out of it. And so he has that pillow all the time that he can, hug or throw or punch when he's feeling upset. But it really helps him to kind of label what it is that he's feeling. And once you label it, you can figure out why you're feeling that way and then apply some coping skills. So we talked about like some great ways to talk to your kid, that 15-minute connection time. This is one of my favorite books for doing this, and they have a teen version as well. And I think that this is just a great way to how do you communicate with your kid, and how do you listen to them so they will keep talking to you? I think those are really important because that discipline happens through connection. If you're not connected with your kid, you can't discipline them either. And this applies to teachers as well. So the kids, if you're finding a kid that's particularly difficult to discipline, might try connecting with that kid a little bit more and then see if things go better. Often you can get, at least in parent-child relationships, you can get about a 50% symptom improvement with just having more connection. And so you want them to keep talking to you. What I will say is you want to have a lot of external structure and routines. It kind of helps them build their own executive functions. We have this is everything you need to do to be ready for bed. You have to take your allergy medicine, brush your teeth, wash your face. These are the steps to be ready for bed up on the mirror in the kids' bathroom, because they can't quite externalize that yet. And then you do need to have rules around things like, what's the expectation in terms of chores? What's the expectation? What are your rules in terms of screens and sleep, and expectation that there be time spent with the family? So every time we've had a new privilege, we try to be really thoughtful about it. Like the phones came with a contract that we all signed. This is what your responsibility is. This is what our responsibility is. And you don't get this thing until we've talked about what the rules are around it. And it's been really, really helpful for us in terms of, that phone privilege, particularly. You better believe we're going to have a contract around a driver's license and a first car. Absolutely. Because those are big, big parts. So I just love Dr. Ross Greene. He's kind of created this new world, these kind of new approaches that are a little bit less based on rewards and punishment and a little bit more based on his model of collaborative problem solving. So he believes that if there's an expectation your child is having difficulty meeting, you don't have a kid that needs to be motivated. You have a problem to be solved. So it is where you work together with a kid to solve this problem. So it starts with very, very neutral. So I've noticed that you're having a hard time getting out the door on time in the morning. What's up? And you ask questions, and then you say, well, I really need us to leave the house at 7:45 so that I can be on time for work. How do you think we can work together to make that happen? And so you've now expressed your need. You've taken a neutral approach, and you're not doing this in the moment, by the way. You're not doing this at 8:05 when you're supposed to leave at 7:45. You're doing this maybe over dinner that night or at bedtime when the day is over and you're like, this is a problem we've been coming into. Let's talk about how we can solve that problem and see what solutions a child comes up with, and whatever solution, and then work together. Maybe some of those solutions you think will be good, and then they will be much more likely to adhere to the solution if they have been part of the process of coming up with it, rather than if they have been imposed. Well, I'm changing your alarm clock so that you're now going to be waking up at 6:45 instead of 7. But they might come to you and say, I think I really need more time. Maybe I need to set my alarm clock earlier, that kind of thing. Another thing, I love the book, How to Raise an Adult, by Julie Lythcott-Haims. Dr. Lythcott-Haims was an admissions officer at Stanford. And so she really got the deal into, these incredible kids with their incredible transcripts. But she also noticed that these kids were getting into Stanford, had incredible grades, extracurriculars, SAT scores, but they couldn't problem solve. They couldn't figure out how to get their medications refilled. She tells a story of one kid who had a large box delivered to their dorm room, and they couldn't lift it, and they couldn't problem solve how to get it into their room. They couldn't figure out, I can unpack it in the lobby and take it up piece by piece. I can ask friends to help me. They could not problem solve it. They just freaked out. And so what we want kids to do, these are the dangers of kind of doing everything for our kids, is leaving them very intelligent, but without a lot of real world skills. So she really advocates, and in general, we all should advocate for allowing kids to make some mistakes and experience natural consequences of those mistakes, and develop resilience, resourcefulness in doing so, because where you really learn, where you really grow is in failure, not in success. And she makes the point that self-care and contribution to the family really need to come before the academics. And you want to think about it. We've heard of helicopter parents. I don't know if you've heard of lawnmower parenting, where you mow down every obstruction in your child's way before they walk to it so they won't fall. And carpenter parenting is where you're building your child exactly as you want them to be. That's not how this works, unfortunately. A better analogy is being a gardener parent, where your child is a seed. You plant them, you water them, you give them sunshine, but the kind of plant that they're going to grow into is up to them. And I think that that's a really powerful way of thinking about it. We can't create our children to be specific. They are naturally who they are, and we just want them to be the best version of themselves that they can be. I really like this book in terms of how gives you specific words for how to encourage growth mindset in kids. And I'm sure you guys know about growth mindset. It's been something that's been coming out. The fixed mindset gives up and doesn't like to fail. And the growth mindset says, well, when I fail, I learn something from it. I can persevere. I can challenge myself. My effort and my attitude are what's important, not my abilities. And these are some particular phrases that you can say. So you might hear a kid say in the classroom or at home, I'm just no good at this. And then try to shift that to, well, what are you missing? What different strategy can you learn? This may take some time to learn it, but you can train your brain how to learn it. And understanding that not everything is supposed to come instantaneously or easily to every single person in every domain. It's normal for there to be some struggle. It's normal for there to be some failure. What's important is picking yourself up. So a parent's job, and same for a teacher, is not to control, because we don't have control of other people. What we can do is we can influence. And you have to figure out who the kid you have is and become comfortable with it. Help them live a life that is aligned with who they are. And as parents and teachers, our job is to be responsive to the hand that you've been dealt, rather than try to shape the kids into something that they aren't. Another thing I want to mention is that in general, you've got to expect that kids are going to be messy. They're going to be impatient. They're going to be loud. This is normal. Have appropriate expectations of kids. Expect them to make mistakes. Be a little bit detached. We are not controlling them. We're influencing them. And just be compassionate and take to yourself as well as to the kids, and take a lot of deep breaths. Not everything in the world needs to be educational. Most of learning actually happens through example and observation, not necessarily didactic, direct instruction. Let them experience some social conflict and negative emotions. You support them, but you don't interfere. And model behaviors that you want them to have, especially in these adolescent years. It is less about what you tell them to do and much more about what you see them doing. So when do you need more help? If the kid's refusing to go to school, if they're having significant social problems, if there's a decline in grades, if you have an adolescent who's not getting through the day without a meltdown, you probably need some extra help. Or if there's just an area of life, be it social, academic, that is not functional, then it's really great to get help. And the earlier, the better. And there's lots of great resources. So TCS has resources, there's clergy resources. You can have evaluations done if you suspect there might be a learning challenge or attention challenge going on. And then there's certainly lots of wonderful therapists, counselors, and doctors who are willing to help you, and lots of different kinds of therapies that might be helpful, that really are supported by research, especially CBT and DBT are very much supported by research for anxiety and depression. And thank you guys very much for having me. I look forward to a bit of discussion and taking your questions.
Thank you so much, Juliana. Okay, so participants, you guys can just, if you want to, you can unmute and ask your question, or if you would rather just put it in the chat, I will read it to Juliana and we can do it that way. So it's up to you guys.
I have a question.
Yes.
You talked in the very beginning about there being a gap in knowing that something is wrong, but still doing it anyway.
Yes.
When you have a wonderful, bright 9-year-old who is acknowledging and understanding that they're not supposed to be doing what they're doing, but they're still doing it and they don't understand why, how can we explain to them what's going on so they're not as hard on themselves and don't have as much anxiety that goes with it?
Can you tell me more of what it is? Because oftentimes what I was talking about with that is not doing a behavior that they should be doing, and you're talking about doing a behavior you shouldn't be doing.
Correct. So we have a firm rule during the week. There is no electronics.
Okay.
Just in the morning, there's some TV time while you eat your breakfast. After that, the rest of the day, unless we're using it for the dictionary or, something like that, no TV, no electronics. So there are times where my son has gone and gotten his Nintendo Switch, and I will find him with it, and he knows better, but he just doesn't understand why he can't control himself to not go get the Switch and play.
Right. Okay. So that's what I was wondering about. That's why I asked the question, is because, the Switch is very reinforcing. So even though you're telling him that this is the rule, this is something that every time he turns it on is giving his brain a huge hit of dopamine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost impossible to have the self-discipline to overcome that. It's almost impossible. How many adults eat chocolate when they or swear that they're going to give up sugar, right? This is even more powerful than that. I think you have to put it where he cannot find it. I think you have to make it, because it's just too tempting. And I don't think a 9-year-old, I don't think you should feel bad at all about it, because I think a 9-year-old probably just isn't capable of resisting that kind of temptation. And so just create, what I was going to say is when you have those, that split between knowing what you're supposed to do and actually doing it, the way to get a kid over that hump is to provide them with scaffolding and strategies and support around that. And in this case, I would say the support would be just make it so there's no access. It goes up a high where he can't see it.
Okay. I have tried my best to try to hide it away in many places, but if it does get seen, then eventually sometime throughout the week it will be brought out. But he does have ADHD, so I'm curious if there's a farther delay within him having that and being able to have that. Well, I mean, like you said, it's not until their 20s that they can really control.
Right. So you kind of at this age at a 9-year-old with ADHD is really a 6-year-old in frontal lobe development. So you have to also think of your expectations that way. No one would expect a 6-year-old to not be able to eat the marshmallow that's right in front of him. Right. The other thing I would say is it sounds like you might have a good opportunity to motivate him. So kids with ADHD are super motivated by reward and not very motivated by punishment. So that's another piece of it. And so I wonder if you could allow, I mean, it's up to you, it's your family, but if you considered allowing, 20 minutes on the switch a day, if certain things were done, that might be a real huge motivating factor for him. I don't know if you have time in your day, if it could be possible, but I wonder if homework would go faster if he knew that it was a possibility he would get his switch, for example. What do you think?
And actually, the part of the reason why we took everything away was because there was a rush to get to it. So homework was
rushed through. Yeah.
It was rushed through. It was not. So then we were spending double the time because we were having to go back and redo. And then that added into more anxiety and being upset. And, so
that makes a lot of sense then. I agree. It's in that particular scenario, probably better to just, it's not an option. You're going to have to figure out something else. Yeah, I agree. Okay. So I don't know where you can hide it, where he would never find it, but hopefully you can find a spot.
I have a few left.
Okay.
other than eventually getting a safe. I don't know. Okay. Thank you.
Safe isn't a terrible idea. I mean, yes, I know. It's difficult.
Okay, we have another question here. Dawn says, I know of CBT, but what is DBT?
So CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, really, really effective for anxiety and depression. DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy. I would only suggest it for older kids. It's definitely not for younger kids. And it can be used for a wide variety of disorders, but it's basically teaching strategies to be okay with things not being exactly as you want them. It's getting you out of that black and white thinking. And black and white thinking is really, really normal until some point in adolescence where they start to see shades of gray. But DBT is really good for people who are just very intolerant of things being other than exactly as they want them. And learning, it's about learning to tolerate and get those shades of gray. And it's used a lot it was used mostly in personality disorders in adults. And then they found that it actually is a really efficacious treatment in teenagers, especially if there's any self-harm going on, or eating disorders, but also helpful for anxiety and depression. It's newer, but newer, but it's still been around for 20, 30 years, but it's newer than CBT. Anybody else? I'm a little curious because I've worked with some other private schools lately who are saying that their adolescents are feeling kind of just generally unmotivated. I'm wondering if that's something that you're seeing there. You don't have a high school, so it might not be as noticeable, but they're certainly noticing it in their high school. Yeah, it's I think it's every aspect of their lives. They're feeling they're not getting their work done. They're not engaging in extracurriculars. That just seems like the teachers are complaining these kids are super, super unmotivated. Um, I'm not sure if that's how I want to think about it, or if maybe there's just a really high level of depression. That's what Brittany, that's what you're thinking. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
And I also just feel like sometimes I do feel like the amount of things, whether it's school plus extracurricular plus whatever, feels like, to me, sometimes feels overwhelming when I hear about it. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's a lot. That would be a lot for me,
Yeah.
you know? So sometimes I don't know like what comes first or what it is, but
I think some of these kids feel like I have to do all of these things and I have to do them all perfectly in order to get it to meet the expectations. And you hear all the time about, kids who are not getting into the colleges that they would like to. I mean, my husband went to UF. He literally filled out a one-page paper application, stapled a $25 check to it, mailed it in, and he didn't even consider applying anywhere else. He didn't think he was going to need to. And that is so different than, you hear about these kids with a 4.6 and the 1500 who don't get in. So, I mean, the kids are under a very different amount of pressure. And I kind of wonder if that is what is affecting them.
I do. I will say I have a sixth grader and he is very busy in sports, very busy in school, but to get him to do his homework, studying anything is like pulling teeth. He is a good student. He sets himself with high expectations and we give him all of the keys to be able to make sure that he gets done what he needs to, but it is still a struggle almost daily. And we have told him that if he, drops his grades and he doesn't do, I guess, well in school, we would have to take the sports away from him, which we have not done. But it's like he's barely making it constantly. And then it's not his fault. So we're dealing with that right now for sure. And then trying to continue getting the straight A's and everything that it's always been easy for him, but now it's not easy.
I almost wonder if this is a little bit like you've got to let him have a little failure in order.
Yeah.
I wonder if you have been so helpful to him that he doesn't feel a sense of ownership of it. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think we have, and a problem that I think we have created is we did it last year and we did it again this year, is telling him if he gets straight A's through the year, that we would give him a certain dollar amount. It's not huge. And that to him is the end all be all. And I wish we could go back and take that away. We can't at this point, but that will not happen in the future.
Right. You have to stick with what you've set to. So I will say with both of my kids, there was one point where we said to them, we're taking off the training wheels academically. And what that means, and I would suggest maybe having that conversation with him and saying, you're on your own. We will help you. We will help you if you come to us and you say, I need help with this math assignment, or I have a project and I don't understand it. We will help you, but they've got to be in the driver's seat. And I strongly suggest putting him in the driver's seat before high school, right? Because you're going to be too scared to take your hands off the wheel when he's in high school because of the consequences for college. Let him have some failure now. It will not end him and it might make him a much, much stronger person. But both of my kids, when we took off the training wheels, they fell down a couple times. They brought home some bad grades until they realized, okay, this is what I have to do. I'm in charge. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I think, and we did do that at the beginning of the year, but we are always staying on top of him. He's an only child. We want to stay on top of him. We have the flexibility to be able to be there for help, for sports, but I think it's actually kind of working against us at this point a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you as a parent, it is the easier thing to do to help them than it is to not help them. It is so hard to sit on your hands and watch them fail. Like it is painful, but the world will teach them much better lessons than your voice ever could. Read the
Yeah.
book, How to Read an Adult, How to Raise an Adult. It will get you out of there. And I think that you'll both be happier. Like there'll be less conflict between the two of you when he's in the driver's seat on his academics and you aren't.
Yeah, and he doesn't argue with us. He's so hard on himself that it hurts my heart.
Oh,
But he's
is-
very hard on himself. So yeah, where I think anxiety falls into place. I believe so.
I mean, at this point with the mental health, just the general things I see, and so many difficulties with failure to launch, and so many people who I know, and the research suggests that this is true, they go to college and then they come home, they don't succeed in their launching. I'm just at this point saying, if you can just find a therapist, it's just a good thing. Like, because just there's so much difficulty around them, especially if there's some anxiety, that could be what's getting in his way to a large degree. And
Yeah.
it's really great for him. Like we looked at, you remember that positive spiral and negative spiral? If he can learn different thought patterns and behaviors now before things get really difficult in, high school and college, that would be great. But like, if you have like a little bit of an anxiety problem, I guarantee you when the hormones hit, and when high school hits, and then when he goes off to college, that you'll get a huge anxiety problem at that point. So if you even see a little thing at this point, I do suggest doing some therapy to help
Okay.
change the trajectory. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be a big problem that takes you to therapy. It really doesn't.
Yeah. Thank you.
I hope that's helpful. And so Nicole's saying, you aren't alone. I need to allow my child to fail things too and not help him so much. It is harder with anxiety because anxiety, they do need a little bit more support. Anxiety is like threading a needle because you want to support them enough that they feel successful, but not support them so much that you increase the anxiety. So it's really hard, isn't it, Brittany? Just dealing with,
Yes, definitely. I totally agree.
It's a hard thing to parent through, and you might need some extra support in it. And you're not alone. 40% of kids.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
I do have a question because one of the things that is big on fourth grade this year has been honor roll. It's our first year to be able to get it. It's, they're getting the certificates in front of all of their other peers, and some are getting it, some are not, so that's been a very big goal for us this year. And I almost wonder I've done the same thing as she, where we are, if you get honor roll this 9 weeks, he wants to go to Monster Jam, we'll go to Monster Jam. We'll get, there will be a reward to that. Is that a good thing, or am I setting myself up for failure in 2 years? Because I do have a high anxiety child as well.
It's really hard because the reward is happening at the community level, right?
Mhm.
So it's really hard to not celebrate that. But I guess maybe you know what I would do? This is what I would do. The honor roll thing that's happening at the community level, you get the pride, you get to walk up in front of your friends. What I would say is, I'm not going to reward you with Monster Jam for making honor roll. I'm going to reward you with Monster Jam if you can do these things. And I would make it more process focused and less outcome focused. So if I see you working really hard, if I see you overcoming, approaching a tough problem and not giving up, if I see you being perseverant, if I see you bringing your homework to school every day and taking your homework out every day, like the behaviors, I would do Monster Jam for the behaviors, not for the outcome. Does that help?
Yes, that does.
Yeah. And
That's
that's
a really good way to look at that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I have high academic expectations of my kids too, but I have to look at where they are, and I want them to focus on the process. So especially through late elementary and middle school, I want it to be about the process, not so much about the outcome. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
A
Try
lot.
that. See if that works.
And
Okay.
And
And
then
I-
that's our goals as a family. What we value in our family is not straight A's. What we value is learning and working hard and being responsible. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, yeah, because we went through it where we didn't realize all B's was not honor roll. And he still did get Monster Jam because I saw how much work he put into it, and I let him know, just because you were 2 points away from getting an A, and that was the difference between you having honor roll or not, that doesn't mean you didn't put in that hard work, and so he still was rewarded. But this 9 weeks coming off of, the straight B one, this 9 weeks coming back, he ended up with 2 A's and 2 B's. So he
Great.
excelled even more. So, but I just want to make sure that when I'm offering the reward, that it's for the right reasons, not, like you said, for the journey, not the ending, so.
And
okay.
that creates a positive spiral where then
Hmm.
he's able to, you're rewarding that process. And so what often happens is that you might have a lot of kids who are really, really high IQ who make A's without any effort. And I will tell you, a lot of those kids fall apart in high school and college because when the effort starts coming in, they don't have the tools to put in the effort. So it's good that he's having to work hard because those high achievers often end up being more successful than those super, super high IQ kids who don't need to work as hard. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think this is our last, that was our last question, but I think that's a helpful perspective because even just on a level for adults, I've been, it reminds me of what James Clear in Atomic Habits talks about, where like the focus, not trying to make the focus on the outcome, but the focus on the behavior. And okay, if I'm working hard every single day at my homework, well, that's going to produce a positive result.
Mhm.
And being consistent with that. So I love that. I love that perspective for rewarding based on those behaviors. And honestly, the outcomes, like positive outcomes, are going to come from that. So
They
I
will
think that's really cool.
eventually. Yeah.
Eventually, right.
Eventually, yeah, they definitely will.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Juliana, and everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am going to be sending out the recording as well as some of the resources, especially the books and stuff that she recommended. And yeah, if you have any questions, obviously for sure reach out to Juliana. She's in our area. She's obviously an incredible neuropsychologist. And yeah, thank you so much, Juliana, for coming and speaking to us. It was really informative and really helpful.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking to all of you and the great discussion.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
My
Thank
pleasure. Take
you.
care.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.